We'd like to thank the following sponsors for helping provide this video.
So, without any further ado, thank you very much, and I'll welcome Alex and Drew.
So, tell me again, David, how is it that you got your current position here?
Well, I was vice president last.
I had heard that you actually missed the meeting.
I missed the meeting.
And lo and behold, something happened.
Here's a lot said. They got back.
Watch your back. That's all you have to say. Alrighty. Welcome, everyone. Hopefully you have what we call the price map. And this became pretty popular because people wanted sets of 6 so they can have dinner on them with their family. So we have extra ones back there. Feel free to take them home and also share the big picture with your family. So we're going to get started. I've heard that you're a pretty inquisitive group. On a scale of 1 to 5, how inquisitive are you? 5, extremely. 1, we don't really care. Go. 5, 4, 6. Okay, wait, I think we have 2 hands as well. 10. So we expected that. So David is coaching us and saying, let me help you get the material into an hour and 10 minutes with everyone's questions answered. Also, if you are in fact here at the end, you'll notice there's a secret code at the bottom. And we just might tell you what the secret code is. Okay. Now that we've got your curiosity, my name is Jemilo. I started out with methodologies when there was this really cool thing released called Visual Basic 1.0. Anyone alive when that happened? Yeah, okay, great. And we were using something really cool called the DEC system. Digital equipment, wasn't that awesome? High tech? Very, very high tech, I know. I moved in the mainframe. Started with Anderson Consulting, now Accenture. Used the lightweight methodologies like Method 1. Anyone that's been there knows that a move to rapid application development was a change, and was there for a couple of years, and then moved on to a consulting company that's now part of Pricewaterhouse. Started my own business about 5 years ago. Came upon this book called Scaling Software Agility. And then after that, several years after, Agile Software Requirements. Sound familiar to anybody? Yeah, it was the only thing I found. It was actually commissioned by a management consulting company to develop a white label scaled Agile framework. And so what do you do when somebody wants to give you money to do something that you think has been invented? You kind of look what's out there. So I did, and there was only one thing. And it was this, what was then called the big picture. Still kind of has its name up here. We call it the big picture here. And we've got that heritage. And I was very fortunate to actually start working with Dean. And since I own the domain name Scaled Agile Framework, I blackmailed him into working with me. So that's my history, and I get to work with great people like Alex.
Thanks, Drew. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Alex Yakyma. I used to be a software engineer in the past, and then eventually engineering manager in outsourcing context. For the last two to 3 years, I worked with Scaled Agile, mostly in Asia and Eastern and Central Europe. It's interesting, this is the first time when Drew and I actually worked together being co-located. Even though we worked together for like 3 years almost. We used to work in a way that Drew is somewhere in the US. In the same time, I'm somewhere in Bengaluru or New Delhi, doing an Agile quick start, as we call it, making another distributed organization approach lean Agile success. That was amazing. But I never knew what it is to teach with you being in the same room. It's awfully...
It's a pleasure, isn't it?
It's awfully pleasure, yeah. Thank you. It's awesome to be here.
He's also shorter than he looks on video. So with that, I'm going to chase him off stage. Hi, Alex. You're on in 15, I think. All right, what are we going to talk about today? We talked a lot with David, and we wanted to understand what you would want to hear about. And we know that there's a lot of buzz. We know that we have effective Agile methods that do work. And we also know that what we've been trying to bring to the world is a way to use what is already working at a higher level of abstraction. So today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the fact that we live in a complex world. I'm going to ask you to tell me what you view as complexity. We're going to talk about how the Scaled Agile framework works and just the nuts and bolts. We're going to use our placemats, we'll use our big picture because I never leave home without it. And then we're going to talk about how the framework addresses the complexities that we discussed. And Alex, who has actually lived the world of complexity much more than I have, will be chatting about that.
I just noticed that this audience has an advantage over us. Their version of big picture is 2.5, and ours is 2.1. Isn't that awesome?
Yes.
It is.
Do you mean they are the very first group to the pre-release being launched at Agile 2013? You've got the first pre-release. So we'll show you how to get to the secret site afterwards, where you can actually click through this. And then after that, we'll talk a little bit about business results, what we've been seeing in the field as companies across the world are adopting this. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how you can start fast, time permitting. And then we'll end up with some nice, luxurious, long Q&A. All right, are you guys ready? Good, I hope so. True or false, we live in a complex world? True. All right, thank you very much. We're done. Actually, let's chat a little bit. And I do want to hear from you. Software development complexity. Why is it complex? Reason number one. In today's world. Change, continuous change. Faster than ever.
Interoperability.
Interoperability, aha, we have more choices than ever.
Scalability.
Aha, scalability. Because more and more people have things like smartphones and computers and tablets. And?
Interactions.
Regulations.
Go ahead. Interactions.
Interactions, because people are distributed everywhere. How many people have the luxury of actually having all of your teams together in one geographic location? 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're at about 2%, somewhere around there. Okay. And let's continue. Let's think about complexities as we go out into the world and continue developing more and more complex software.
Privacy and security.
We have lots of excitement about this. Security.
Regulations.
Regulations. Ooh, we are in a regulated world. Anyone work in healthcare? Sure. Pretty regulated. Financial services, banking. Yeah, over there. Regulations, and we got a few more.
Feature creep.
Oh, scope management. We want it all right now. How do you govern that? How do you allow?
I wanted it yesterday.
And we want it fast. We want it faster. Finally, what else makes your life complex?
Weird personalities.
I live that every single day. Weird personalities. I think with that one actually made me laugh. And if I laugh, we kind of go on to that. So thank you for that. So we see that there are so many factors of complexity. There's technical complexity. There is a changing world. There are a lot of things going on. There are personalities, there are cultures. Ever try and have a long meeting with a group in India? Who's getting up at 3? Who's going to bed at midnight? We have a lot of conflicting priorities. So what we want to do is we want to take this, as well as what we've seen out in the industry of the complexities, and how we've worked very hard to help address those with the scalable framework. We need to keep pace. We have a modern world. And what I'm going to do is my secret trick of blanking things out. See that? Because sometimes I just like to talk to you and turn away from the slides. I live in Chicago, which is pretty well known for theater and for comedy. And I took my nephew to this comedy show, and it was great. This guy was in a car, and he opened up his window, and he yelled something obscene at somebody, and then he closed his window. And so it kind of went like this. Hey, what are you doing? And then he wound it back up and stopped. And I said, wasn't that funny? And he said, what was he doing? He was winding up his window and winding it down. And he's like, why? What is that? We live in a complex world. Nobody winds up their windows or winds them down anymore. What are the other ways that things that are intuitive to us that are being automated? Anyone trying to fix their car lately? Yeah, the days of car tinkering are over. And so the world is running on software. It's running more and more on software. And speaking of Moore's Law, what is Moore's Law? Cost of hardware goes down, computing power goes up. If you talk to some people, it's 2 years. If you talk to Intel, it's every 18 months. And we've got Moore's Law Plus for software. We have more capabilities. We know that we don't just have physical devices. We have a layer of abstraction and increasing complexity with our software design and our software functionality. And we know that we've had methods that have worked. Raise your hand if you've used waterfall. Raise your hand if you were a rupper. Unified process. If you use one of those cool adaptive methods like rapid application development or spiral or things like that. If you use this crazy thing called Scrum, extreme programming, we have methods, and they were helping us keep up. However, we're accelerating and accelerating and accelerating, and we're building larger and larger, more complex systems with more and more people everywhere around the world. And we have to deal with those complexities. And these processes, methodologies, or frameworks aren't keeping pace with our rate of development. And that's the problem we're trying to solve, to keep pace. And we know that we have great things. We have Scrum, we have XP that work great in small environments. Long ago, when I first started with it, I would talk about large teams, 5 teams. I was working in a large enterprise environment. And now, who works in an environment with more than 5 teams? More than 10 teams? More than 15? More than 20? More than 25? More than 30? More than 35? More than 40? More than 50? Got him! Someone. More than 50. But how many is that?
I think it's 49 or 50.
49 or 50. And how many people? You're somewhere around under 500.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
about 300.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is huge. And a couple years back, 500 was enormous for me. It was my first big scaling job. Alex and I are working with a group of practitioners, 10,000. How do you scale that? So we want new approaches that leverage what's working now. We know Agile is working. We know that Lean works. And we just want to take that and capitalize on what's already working. So we've got that complexity, and we see that we need to rethink so that we can keep pace in an increasingly complex world. Do you think if we did this again, we could actually double our list?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure if we did a breakout, we could triple it or quadruple it. So we're going to talk about aspects of complexity, and Alex, who has dealt with complexity much more of his life in Ukraine, much more of his life than I ever have.
Everything is so complex in Ukraine.
Trust me. He's going to be taking us through a couple of the problems that we see. Too many in-flight projects. I've gone into a place where I say, how many big things do you have going on right now? Well, we lost count, but we want to do about 1,200 big things. They showed me the spreadsheet. And I was supposed to be working with them on portfolio management. Guess what I asked them to do? Hit the delete button. I made them hit the delete button. Of course, it went to the recycle bin. But it was freeing for them to hit the delete button, and we started over. And we interactively built a list of the top 50, and we're able to limit that. Unaligned organizations. Okay, anyone here a consultant? Sometimes you can write your assessment before you even walk in the door. Number one, conflict or tension between product management and software delivery. Sound familiar to anybody?
Yeah.
First one, I could just wake up and give them the assessment and they say I'm brilliant. You can too, right? Thousands of practitioners, and we're seeing actually working with 10,000 right now. Distributed teams, more than just 2 locations. and complex time zones. Millions of lines of code. This is just a taking the temperature. And I'm going to see if you win again. How many people are dealing with an environment that has more than 10,000 lines of code? Raise your hand. 20,000. 30, 40, 50, 60, 12 billion? Thank God, we got him. All right, alrighty, and chaotic architecture and a bloated technology stack. I see some laughs and hands going up, lightning fast. And with that, Alex, how are we gonna solve this?
Well, we're going to solve this by first representing what the Scaled Agile framework is, and I guess you're going to do that.
That's right, I certainly am. Thank you, Alex. We've been on our feet at this for days. So thanks for reminding me. So about the Scaled Agile framework, I thought I was ahead of schedule.
That's just yet another gotcha.
Yeah, I know. What is it? How many people have gone to scaledagilepframework.com? All right, you've got a little picture of what you see there. Everything is clickable. And it was actually a decision we made a couple of years back. We wanted something that was scalable. There were books. We know the web, this crazy thing called the web, everyone was using. And we knew that to scale and to help the world scale, we couldn't keep it to ourselves. A lot of proprietary frameworks out there, a lot of consulting companies have their own. Can you get it? What do you have to do to get DSDM? Pull out your credit card. So it's out there, it's publicly facing, it's available. Please use it freely. We have in class this week companies that have adopted it. We never even knew. And they came in, they wanted to learn more. So there they are. And very grateful that they're applying it and learning more, continuously improving. What the intention is to synchronize across the organization, to align what we invest in to how we execute. And we also know that it's well defined out there on the web, hundreds of pages that you can click into and short synopses in more detail. And we know we've applied it successfully to very large organizations. We've got some core values with the framework, and when we think about core values, there are things that actually make it work. The pieces of it that actually we value for all of the mechanics to come together. Code quality. If you build crappy code really fast, and you're going really fast for 6 months, how fast are you going in 2 years? Slow. We value that. We value software craftsmanship. We value program execution. You can envision it. You can have 1,200 things you want to do. If you can't execute anything, do you have value? No. We value alignment. If you have a conflict between product management and development, and perhaps you're out of touch with your customers, you're not aligned, not so good. So we know just very simple things like alignment are important. And then we also know transparency. Anyone ever hear the term radical transparency? Something where you have visibility all the way up to the leadership, all the way back down to the people on the ground doing the work. So that's the kind of the high level what the Scaled Agile framework is. Agile methods. True or false, there are lots of great things out there in addition to the stuff any of us do individually. True, of course. We had Scrum, works great, less filling. And we know that we're using it, the world has adopted it. We leverage it. We've got extreme programming. It came from great coders. And as extreme programming kind of disappeared, where did those great coders go? To write really great tools to write great code, like automated testing tools. And then we have Kanban. Anyone use Kanban in their organization? When you use Kanban, what are you trying to do? Name 3 things that you're trying to do. Number 1, or what it does.
Work in progress, lead time.
Right? It manages your cycle time, your lead time, limits your work in process, gives visibility, allows you to visualize. All the great things, and we know that's good, and we really like it. So what we did with the framework is we took all this good stuff. We took the iterative and incremental development that we knew worked. We took agile development, which is what it became. We knew that lean thinking is really important. And we know this thing called product development flow, which is really kind of the next step in lean thinking, is really important. We'll chat about that very briefly. And then everything you see in the framework has actually been field tested. And so, yes, there may have been some thinking, but everything has been incrementally built, tested in the field. We get feedback, and that's why we have big picture 2.1 here and 2.5 there. It came from sessions with people like David that has evolved this because they're going out there doing it and bringing back information from around the world. That's it. Does it look simple? Is in a complex world, how complex is that? It's manageable. And you've got the 3 levels that pretty much map to levels that we think of conceptually in the world. We've got portfolio management, program management, and teams. We know teams are the foundation. We bring teams of teams together to the program. And then, of course, we manage these programs in a portfolio. Sound familiar? Okay. So let's talk about the Agile teams. Our Agile teams are self-managing, self-organizing. Is that an overused term? Is something that I've heard quite a bit. Does anyone really feel as though they have self-managing, self-organizing teams? Raise your hand. Okay, we have 1. What makes them self-managing and self-organizing? I know this is tough.
It's a collaborative effort.
Collaborative effort? Yep. Are they waiting for people to tell them what to do? Twiddling their thumbs? Nope. Do they need a manager looking over them? Is it helpful to have a scrum master to develop processes?
Yes.
Self-managing? Self-organizing? Do they blame each other? They organize to get the work done. They're aligned to a common mission. We know that teams can be self-managing and self-organizing if we have a common mission and vision for them to follow. And if they have that direction, as good leaders provide, we know that they can self-manage, self-organize as long as we've got that vision. We put together, we apply Scrum management practices and XP, and we know we want fully tested software every, how long are your sprints? 2 weeks? Who has 3? Who has 4? Yeah, 4 is kind of dying. 3, 2 is pretty common. So we've got our Agile teams as the first level, and then what we do is we scale to the program level. And the thing with scaling to the program level is it's not that much different than the team level. All we're doing is think the same things at a higher level up. Our programs are just teams of teams. And just like teams self-organize and self-manage, programs can be self-managing and self-organizing if structured the same way. We know that it's very costly for people to wait around telling them what to do. We know it's costly for programs to hang out and wait for somebody to tell them what to do. We also make sure we are, just like teams have a common mission and vision to align to, the same thing with programs. And then rather than every 2 weeks, we have fully integrated across the stack software every 8 to 12 weeks. We've got common sprint lengths because we know that if we have some people on 2-week sprints, some on 3, some on 4, and they have to integrate, integration tends to happen late, and you have fewer integration points. And then we know as well, just like teams doing face-to-face planning is a good thing, programs getting together and doing face-to-face planning, all 100 people at the same time is a good thing. Deep breath, what do we think about the concept of programs just being a fractal or one level above? Now what we do when we scale to the portfolio is we really try and think about centralization versus decentralization. Isn't that tough for some people that are leaders or managers or directors? Hardest time in my career was actually when I was an architect and then I became a director. And I had a really hard time letting people do things that I thought was 80% as good as what I was doing. And it took, I see some people nodding. It's hard, isn't it? It's hard to let go and do that, but you have to manage in a different way, and you have to decentralize or allow people to make their decisions under that vision. We know up here we've got investment themes. We set the budgets, and then we allow the programs to run off the budgets. We have what is called the Kanban system, a way so that we don't have 1,200 things that we're trying to do at the same time. We do the same things in Kanban at the portfolio level. We limit WIP, work in process. We make it visible, and we take advantage of that. We also know that we have an enterprise architecture, and that architecture is what we call a first-class citizen. And then finally, we know that we have to have objective measures to actually have fact-based measures. Milestones. Design complete, is that meaningful, or 3/4 of our features are complete? It's more meaningful. Who says A, design complete is meaningful? Who says B, 75% of the features are complete is meaningful? We have to rethink that. That's the important thing. Behind the framework is what we call the House of Lean. And this just reinforces several different models of the House of Lean. We don't make this stuff up. Everything comes from proven principles. And you're going to see that we have the goal is value, of course, value delivery. The foundation is leadership. We've got as well respect people. We know that if we don't respect people, machines don't build products, people do, and we respect our customers. And then we've got Kaizen. What does Kaizen mean? Continuous improvement. And if we want to be more proactive, we can do better. What's the difference between continuous improvement and we can do better?
Well, continuous improvement has a feedback loop that you actually find something specific you're going to improve.
Continuous improvement does have a feedback loop. Sometimes it might seem passive because it's oftentimes overused. We can do better is almost a call to action. We chose to use the word Kaizen. We also have in the middle product development flow. And this came from Donald Reinerson, and we reference him quite a bit. There are 8 principles actually that we're not going to really dive into. They may seem intuitive. Hey guys, take an economic view. Don't do it based on relationships. Be objective in what you fund. Actively manage your queues. Don't let big lists of things stack up. 1,200 things in line waiting to be done. Not so good. Understand and exploit variability. Don't be afraid of things changing. We're not machines. We like to innovate. Reduce batch sizes. Okay, don't try and push a lot of stuff through the system. Set your WIP limits. Don't let too many things be started at the same time. Use cadence and synchronization. Control flow. Cadence and synchronization examples are things like the sprint planning meeting. We all come together at a set time and we plan together. Get feedback as fast as possible. Of course, we know the faster we get feedback, the faster we succeed, or the faster we fail. Yep. And then decentralized control, which is toughest for who? The guys that have the control. Yep. That's a little tough. And we know these are important. So now, finally, Alex, can I turn it over to you?
Oh, please.
Thank God. All right. I stayed in my time box.
You're going to lose control.
Thanks. Oh, there you go.
Thank goodness.
Well, thank you, Drew. That was a good overview because we will need all this information in order to understand how we cope with complexity. And first aspect of it will be too many in-flight projects. Drew already asked this question, how many projects do you have in flight? You will be surprised what we see in certain cases. It's hundreds and hundreds of projects going on. And it's a terrible situation because A, companies sometimes don't even suspect how many things they have going on at the same time. B, they think they're progressing and they're trying to maximize utilization. Everybody seems busy, it's just that nobody finishes work. There's a lot of problems with quality, with lack of feedback in such a model. That's what we're trying to solve with the framework. And the way we do that, first of all, is by introducing Kanban system at the portfolio level. We would like to limit work in process so that we could always concentrate on just fewer, most important things and get them go through the system faster, as fast as possible. For this purpose, we use economic prioritization with cost of delay that is applied at the portfolio and program level, which ensures that we always work on the most important things. Also, what is important is how we fund these initiatives. We still have big initiatives. That's okay to have them. We call them epics. We don't like project terminology because projects typically assume a couple of bad things, like real bad things. Have you seen people in the organization actually have a tendency to stick to the current project and add more and more functionality to it instead of basically reducing the functionality if the value is already there? That happens because people fund projects directly. We go away from that model. We try to fund what we call Agile release trains, Agile programs. Everything else, everything that goes into implementation is simply prioritized. But we are not bound to those initiatives. There's no reluctance, though, as a result, in basically reducing the scope, changing the scope, actually looking at the objectives that we already achieved. And we say that one of our key principles, guiding principles, is ignore sunk cost. So if an epic went through the implementation across multiple releases, and at a certain point we see that it doesn't make sense to proceed down that path, we simply stop doing that. There will be some other things that are more important at that certain point in time. This lightweight approach allows us to get rid of that project mentality and simply maximizes value that we create in such an organization. Agile release trains actually implement the value, and the way we define them is quite simple. These are the Agile programs organized around value streams. So we have a meaningful way to form up Agile release trains, Agile programs, and fund value streams, fund Agile programs. On your big picture, which is 2.5, you already have this new object called value stream. We still don't have it in this older variant, but this is a very important artifact. This is important thing to consider that brings the order into this type of organization. And basically, having said that, all the projects that we have, so to speak, all of those initiatives, we call them epics. You may have as many of them as you wish, but you always control what is currently going on. You prioritize and you let those Agile release trains implement what's most important at certain point in time. Second problem is lack of alignment. And by the way, out of all of these problems that we will touch on today, this is the most interesting. This is the biggest opportunity for improvement. Well, tell me, if you have a code base of 1 million lines of code, how easy, how simple it is to redesign that system. If it's not ideal, just go ahead and redesign. Well, first of all, people who would you say it to would say, okay, just please, go away. It's hard. This is much simpler. This is much easier. Just getting stakeholders and teams aligned around common mission is much, much simpler. And we do that as a result of a couple of things. First off, a content authority in the organization. We build this enterprise backlog model where we have portfolio backlog through which some of the initiatives descend to program backlog. That's not it. Drew just has mentioned the decentralization effect that we create by simply setting up business criteria that we want to meet, and in this way programs actually are self-organized. They can define what makes sense in order to bring viable economic results. Program backlog, so to speak, represents key priorities, key economic priorities for every program. Then goes the team level. Every team respectively operates under the purview of product owner as a person who takes care of the content. By this whole model, we establish content authority in the organization. Other things like architectural guidance, which we will talk about a little bit in more detail, help us align around same idea for the whole organization. One of the most interesting and most exciting things that we use in order to show to the organization what alignment is and actually experience it is what we call PSI, or release planning. This is highly collaborative type of event where everybody in a single program, all the teams, stakeholders, everyone who has a stake in these initiatives goes into the same big room. They work 2 days together on basically coming up with a plan, presenting first of all what's needed to be done, trying to understand that, breaking that down into smaller initiatives, and trying to understand what are we building within the next 8 to 12 weeks. This is a very important example of alignment. This is part of what we call Agile Quick Start. This is the way we enter organizations. Once this is established, we can rely on what Drew has mentioned as program execution, which is one of the core values. After that is done, we can establish Lean Agile Enterprise. Lean Agile portfolio management makes sense only when we have Agile programs that operate this way, that are aligned and that are building something that they know they're building. And in fact, we try to approach everything in Scaled Agile framework from the perspective of systems thinking. We value, let us say favor, global alignment way over local optimization. That's a key thing. Sometimes we may have a situation when a single Agile team has a problem with maintaining their actual velocity, but who knows, maybe that is because they're helping few other teams to maintain theirs and create much better effect for the overall program performance, and that's a good behavior from this perspective, from the systems point of view. Well, big organizations are complex because they're big. When we have thousands of people, it's really hard to organize into something effective. However, we've learned that Agile programs provide good performance, and we know how big they are just from practical considerations. On one hand, there's such a thing as Dunbar's number. There's a history to that. Is anybody had a chance to look into this and see the logic behind this? Dunbar's number is actually showing us how many people we may maintain meaningful relationship with. It makes a lot of sense because we look at Agile release trains as self-organized teams of Agile teams. This is that team that creates end-to-end business value at scale. So that's one of the limiting factors. Another one is basically a very simple fact that when you have a couple of key stakeholders at the program level, they can actually take care, or they can comprehend. There's a couple of key objectives that the teams come up with as a result of planning and further execution. And finally, we took a lean perspective, and when you have 10 teams, how many dependencies may a single team in such a program have? May have no dependencies, may have 1, may have 2. What's the max number? It's 9, right? It's 9. Well, what if it's 20 teams? It may again vary from 0 to 19. But see that it's still same team, small Agile team. So it may have few dependencies, so it may have almost 20 dependencies. So there occur internal bottlenecks, internal cues that prohibit us from basically establishing real productive system. When a single team of 7 people has 5 other teams dependent on them, that creates a bottleneck in the system. That's not good. So that's why we're trying to limit number of teams to establish a faster flow of value. And of course, reflect a little bit on how we form up those teams. What are they? Are they component teams? Are they feature teams, which also contributes to those dependencies and internal queues? And finally, as we can form up these Agile release trains, we put them together into portfolios. The portfolio funds them. Portfolio establishes those cross-cutting initiatives that touches on multiple Agile release trains and what they do. But in large organizations, sometimes we have a situation when there is something even beyond portfolio. That's not uncommon, that sometimes portfolio, sometimes this is not the entire whole lean Agile enterprise. Sometimes this is just a business unit. You may have a couple of portfolios in a larger company. That's okay. It's important, though, that we create a meaningful construct that is manageable. So you may have only a certain number of teams in a program so that it's manageable. You may have only a certain number of programs in the portfolio so that it's manageable. There can be theoretically as many levels as we need. What is important that still it all depends on program execution. That's the key thing. Program execution creates the economical viability of what Lean Agile Enterprise can actually produce. Distributed teams. This is another interesting discussion. Most of the cases at scale are distributed. Eventually, if you have a program of 100 people and more, they're distributed by definition. Even if it seems that they are co-located. It's hard to say that they are co-located when people sometimes don't see one another for weeks. They don't happen to communicate, to get aligned. But especially when we have a real distribution over multiple different continents. And Drew and I had a lot of projects like that when we would run quick starts, as we call them, help programs adopt agility when there will be a couple of different locations and teams distributed over the, some teams would be in North America, some of them would be in India, and product owners will be all over the place in Europe. How cool is that? Well, there's a lot of things that you can do in such a situation, and Scaled Agile Framework actually evolved by solving this type of problems. One thing we learned that whatever is the nature of that distribution, you should have 2 main locations per program. If you have more than that, you should basically fly in people from one location to another, or somehow create a proxy to those guys. Reduce it to 2 locations only. Once it's done, we can we can run PSI planning, we can do release planning just almost as effectively. But in fact, it has even greater effect. Even greater effect than in the co-located case. Why? Because it's not uncommon at all that people that are offshore typically treated differently. There's a lot of barriers. There's a lot of boundaries. Sometimes that's part of another organization. It's some outsourcing company that treats you as a client that doesn't help at all. Because agility assumes trust, and that's very important. So, very typical feedback that Drew and I would receive as a result of these joint planning sessions would be, it's great. Finally, we understood that those folks in India are just like us in terms of value creation. Not to mention what those folks in India think after such an event. They're really motivated. And when companies' executives present a business briefing to them as in the beginning of every PSI planning, guess what people think that never seen anybody from the client side, and now company's VP of product development talks to them and presents to them what is the business vision for the next couple of PSIs, potentially shippable increments. They're excited, and the whole importance of this event is so much obvious and explicit. Millions of lines of code is just complex because it's too much. Not to mention that sometimes part of that can be a legacy system written by that company's CEO 30 years ago in COBOL.
A true story.
A true story. It's funny, but it's true. That is a problem only if we don't approach it properly. So what we suggest we're doing is that we apply agile practices, agile engineering practices and approaches, which help us out to keep the code base healthy. But when we say code quality, we don't mean code quality as a formal attribute of code. That's not what we care about. Cultural aspect is first thing. So it's a culture of continuous integration across multiple agile teams. Frequent integration of software, that's what brings health to software and drives away all those smells that we see. It's a test-first approach that means that teams actually try to at least reason about what they're building prior to building it and building quality in first. It's refactoring that is always localized effort, but basically backed up by continuous integration at scale. As a scalable practice starts making sense. But that's not it, because large code base may have another problem. It's the way teams are organized in Agile program. Sometimes we have programs that consist mostly of component teams. There's this misconception that if I'm a components team, I know what's best for this component. Well, it has nothing to do with truth. In fact, component teams quite often lack a holistic view of user scenarios and can't really implement anything without breaking some other functionality. But even though we favor feature teams over component teams, it's still okay to have some component teams in certain cases. What's important is that we look at the Agile program as one self-organized team that is busily finding better and better ways of establishing fast flow of value. And so feature team versus component team is nothing but simply a matter of establishing faster flow. You need way less people to make end-to-end feature a reality. Well, knowledge depreciation is much lower in such case. Feedback is enforced by a smaller number of people involved in such a thing, so quality is higher because it takes way less time than in the case of component teams to find the real cause of the defect. Finally, architecture is only called architecture sometimes. It's just a bunch of ideas that evolved because I didn't even bother to understand what was your idea behind that piece of code. So I interpreted it in my own way, because by the way, you're 3 blocks away from me. You code out of the same code base, and I have no idea what it means. There's a lot of problems that we see when we approach software agility from the perspective of legacy mindsets, of big upfront design. We know that doesn't work very well. But another thing doesn't work either. We know we need some emergent design techniques, but when you have 15 agile teams in a program that do their own thing each, it's not helpful. They build their own thing each. So there's a real need for some overall architectural governance and guidance, which we call intentional architecture. It's something that we define at fairly high level of abstraction, within which there is still room for emergent design. That's okay. Agile teams know the best. And by the way, they know much better sometimes how to build the system than those PowerPoint architects. That's okay. In fact, in the old school of big upfront design, still, developers design the system. Do we want that or not? They try to adjust that lousy system design that would never work because it's big upfront design. They try to adjust that to their real needs. So why not to teach them how to do that properly, but just giving them overall governance and guidance. And so they would have the means to feed more ideas to intentional architecture. And we would have a way to inform all the teams of how to design software so that we are building a holistic system that would enable value delivery in the future instead of slowing us down. And of course, we value simplicity. That's our cornerstone, especially at scale. That it only enables collective ownership of code, and even more important thing, collective test ownership. Because I may not even understand the code that you are working on, but I want to understand the tests that you develop, because I still may break them. So I need to know what I may potentially break. All of these things come from good old design principles like open-closed or separation of concerns. This is all helpful stuff. Ideas like domain-driven design, where we try to keep solution architecture as close as possible to the problem domain, so that it becomes our common ubiquitous, as Eric Evans calls it, ubiquitous language. It's much easier to communicate. We have something similar metaphor of the system, which is shared metaphor. Now, this was all just to provide good business results as a result of adopting all these practices in Lean Agile organization, which Drew will present to us.
Hey, Alex.
I'm exhausted just watching him.
I don't know. So, you know, at the end of the day, this has to make good business sense. And we know that we like to do good things, and we also know that we also have people that fund it. And how many people actually have control over budgets, or you are decision makers when it comes to how budgets are allocated? So it helps, we have some. It really helps to have some numbers behind it. And I'm going to show you where you can find them, because we're approaching the time for Q&A. I know you guys, it has been painful, kind of keeping the questions. A little bit? Okay, good. So let's just pop over to the Scaled Agile Framework website, and we'll see, of course, there are our Safe Enterprises, John Deere. We have Chad Holderup, actually in class this week, who was part of the John Deere transformation. Nokia, BMC, Nordstrom, and Nordstrom.com, Visa, TradeStation, Tripwire, Mitchell, Discount Tires, Nokia, and many more. We're discovering them every single day. We hear stories out there. So let's just pop over to the site, and everything you can find here. So if you go to scaledagileFramework.com, you'll see case studies, and this is growing. We've got a couple more in process, and we can talk about things like case studies of the portfolio Kanban system working, BM software, which is one of the bigger successes, TradeStation, and you can surf around here. And as you go in here, you can actually get a summary of the case study and then more information as well. Popping back, just a couple of numbers to kind of, you know, put those, leave you with those. John Deere, what they did is they produced embedded systems for tractors. And think about the complexity of course, your end user is a farmer in Argentina, hoping that his tractor works and having to ship on a USB drive embedded software for the tractor to fix a bug. A little bit complex, probably a little more complex than a lot of us deal with every single day. The cost of actually detecting a bug and actually from the point of fixing it to getting on the USB to shipping it out went down. Field resolution time went down. And the warranty expense went down because they weren't spending so much money. Both of them went down about 50%. Time to production down 20%. Time to market 20% faster. And then they did employee engagement surveys, and those were up as well. I'll look at one more, my favorite, TradeStation Technologies. They were what I call a distressed environment, meaning that they were having problems over 4 years ago. After the course of 4 years, they knew they always needed to improve, but they ended up winning the Barron's Award for Best Trading Platform over these guys. over E-Trade, TD Ameritrade, Charles Schwab, Fidelity. And that was the result of applying the framework and all the practices that Alex talked about. You can't just have good organizational structures in place. You have to have good quality code practices, good portfolio management up here. And I'll just serve those. A couple other things you can take a look at, and we'll open up. I want to give you the tools that you can use to search around, is any of the things that we talked about. You're interested in lean, and you can go out there, and this works great in iPad too. You get an abstract, and then you get a lot more detail behind it. And people have actually implemented the framework just with the information that's out there and publicly available. And then we've got the Scaled Agile Academy. The secret code on your place card is we've got a course coming up in Washington, D.C. And we invite you to use the secret promo code. That's $150 off the course as well. And that was made just for you. So getting back, what we're going to be doing is we're going to see if you actually have any questions or whether we wore you out. Alex, want to come back up? David, do you want to help?
Yeah.
Oh, good. People are worn out.
So I saw dependency management within an Agile release train, but how do you handle dependency management between Agile release trains?
That's a good point. Alex, you or me?
Go for it.
All right, so, okay, visualize an Agile release train, a program of 50 to 100 people, maybe 125, and we know the way to resolve dependencies are at these big release planning meetings. It's great when you're in a room this size, of course, because, and I had a Scrum Master come up to me once when I was coaching a train and said, I can't really do it. Why? Because I don't know if that team over there can actually do it for me when I need it. They have to do it in sprint 2 so that I can start it in sprint 3. What do I do? What would you tell that Scrum Master? Walk! He's 100 feet away, right there. Easy to manage dependencies within trains because you plan together. The way I've seen it done when you have really much more tightly coupled trains, there are so many dependencies between them, is larger companies will have a facility. Large campuses are great, so that you can actually run them concurrently, and then have those connection points, those contact points, real time. Now we know that you can't do it all real time during the planning meetings, and you know as well that you have the traditional things that work, your scrums, your scrum of scrums, and then you can have types of scrums between what we call the release train engineer, the little guy here with a hat, to keep the trains on the tracks. And so we use a lot of the same traditional techniques, program management, to be able to manage those complexities because, of course, sometimes the good old way of doing things, actually communication, as well as traditional coordination tools, distributed tools, work pretty well as well. And Alex, what else do you want?
Previewing the work that may come to different Agile release trains is also very helpful. We call it program backlog grooming. So this is typically done by a way smaller audience than the entire whole program. And this is the time where you have an opportunity to look into what are the cross-train dependencies. And you still have time to go to folks from another train and arrange for something. Sometimes you even have time to run a spike or two to prototype something, to understand something better. Not to mention that these all dependencies can be managed as we implement the functionality with an Agile release train. It's not a fixed scope commitment, it's not a black box implementation. Trains may actually synchronize across the organization even as they go through PSI execution. That's okay. Sometimes people from other different trains can be invited to this train system demo. It's also okay to see how are things going there. Should we take care of something else or change plan or somehow approach the risk management?
I had a real world example of this where I was working with a client that had 60 teams in 4 release trains. So it's an average of 15 teams per train. And obviously most of the dependencies were within the train, but there were some explicit integration points between each of the trains. And we had an Agile program management office in headquarters that we'd have a release train engineer facilitate a weekly scrum of scrums at the release train level. So just brought it up one level and became a fraction.
Absolutely. And we can't forget, we do have what's called the program portfolio management function. And again, we try and decentralize control. We try and resolve those dependencies down at the program level and avoid that escalation path, at least immediately. But there is typically some type of, we call it PPMO or Agile PMO, that does have some type of touch up there. It's not prescribed. You won't click there and see that in the framework, but that's what we observe in the industry.
Okay, the question I have is, it's kind of a look at this diagram and say, where's the customer? A bit like where's Waldo? In a downscale Agile project, there's a backlog for the project, and the customer is involved at that backlog, accepting things that are done off that backlog, giving things to prioritize, and so on. So the customer is involved in the project backlog, and that's one thing that makes it Agile. So in that case, there's a single backlog, and the customer is involved. Here's a whole lot of backlogs. Where does the poor customer get their input in? Which backlog?
Do you want me to take a shot?
Yes.
You go for it.
Okay, so absolutely fair concern. And first of all, big picture. What we try to reflect is we try to average through the instantiations of Scale Agile framework. And what we see in reality that most of the organizations don't have an opportunity to involve customer. Most of them, well, a lot of them actually don't even try, unfortunately, but a lot of them objectively cannot do that. Now, is there a room for this? Yes, we just don't try to mandate that. Now, there are practices which are part of quality practices that involve customer by definition, or at least someone who's really close to a customer, like acceptance test-driven development, that eventually comes from the spirit of extreme programming, where we have on-site customer as basically as a defined team member, if you will. However, we know that on-site customer that spends all the time on site with the team is basically a rare case. We understand that whenever it's possible, we welcome that. Whenever it's not possible, we even welcome that managed by cadence and synchronization. If you can't involve customer to stay with you every day, do that at least based on cadence, right? If that's possible, that's great. It's just that we can't really mandate that. That's why we don't include it in the big picture. We love that idea. We always encourage companies to do this, but it's not always possible. Sometimes this whole thing has to be proxied. But we're not saying, though, that the initial idea that has some customer input only happens here and then gets completely lost as it gets to the team level and teams implement that, making that a working software. No, that customer input happens at all the levels, and that's okay. It's just that we don't reflect that as part of the big picture. Because it's not a commonly used case, unfortunately.
And at a layer of abstraction, we always define the customer as whoever consumes your work. And we have people that are the voice of the customer. So in traditional Scrum, who's the voice of the customer? Who's talking to the customer? Who's bringing that to the team?
The product owner.
Product owner. Now, anyone read Roman Pickler's book, Creating Products? Yeah, it's a cool book. He has the point of view that a product owner and a product manager are the same thing, because you're working with the team, you're eating their pizza, but you're also going out and talking to the customer. In large-scale systems, what we observe and have seen is that the product owner really is the one that is the voice of the customer to the team, but tends to be more internally facing. And the product manager, if we take a look at the product manager here, product manager tends to be responsible for things like talking to the customer and doing return on investment type things. And you may have a dotted line from the product manager to the product owner, so that you get market-facing feedback down to the product owner. And we know as well that stakeholder management, making sure that nobody comes in at the last minute to your demo to throw stink bombs, is really important. And so they're managing their stakeholders. And the product owner stakeholder may or may not be the direct customer. It could be
various people at the program level, but we know we have direct customers as well. Did that help? A little bit? Okay.
So the same as you have frequent demos and retrospectives within the team, some again, some aspect of the big picture that addresses having release training or program level demos and retrospectives.
Yep, I'm going to click someplace. Alex, you want to grab that? I'll go ahead and click on the framework inspecting.
Yes, so first of all, the most important summary for the program is what we call a PSI, potentially shippable increment, but it doesn't mean that that's where we deliver software. It's just basically PSI is a fixed length horizon at which we plan and get aligned and try to review what we build. In the meantime, every 2 weeks we try to integrate all the assets and produce that as a system demo, which is basically still working tested software that stakeholders review. And we basically foster even high incrementalism, so that teams integrate multiple times per sprint across the program. We foster a single branch policy where they always develop out of the same branch, and no matter the scale, because that gets that fast feedback reliably enough. So the whole framework is indeed based on fast feedback. That was unconditionally one of the most important principles of product development. Well, actually, it's the 7th principle.
Yep. And just
to give you a place to visualize, as Alex mentioned, of course we have our team demo and retro. Doesn't change, it works. But we also have what's called the system demo. So that's this guy here, and what we do every 2 weeks, we want all the teams on the train to show us that all their assets integrate, that that things don't blow up. And so you can click on the system demo to find out what that's all about. And sometimes it makes companies nervous because we say, every 2 weeks when all the Scrum teams are done, it should be integrated together. And then we have the super demo and retrospective, which we call Inspect and Adapt. And Inspect and Adapt is every 8 to 12 weeks, or every larger increment that starts with, again, the release planning meeting and ends with the ceremony that involves everyone in the program. So those are 3 places you can click to find out more about that.
One last question.
You were talking earlier about having I think it was at the portfolio level, was concerned about keeping the flow between 2 teams to multiple teams, so that you were keeping them sort of isolated. Well, maybe isolated is not the right word, but controlling the flow into those teams, I think. Was that at the program level or at the portfolio level?
Oh, the Kanban system?
Yeah, because I was trying to relate how that would relate to Scrum of Scrums.
Yeah.
So Scrum of Scrums, actually one of the practices within Scale Agile framework. Scrum of Scrums is one of the ways to synchronize within a program. We apply that. However, that's not the only way to synchronize, of which others are ad hoc collaboration between team members on different teams. We really encourage a developer from this team just taking a sticky and going to the other team area just to talk about that. We encourage collaborative requirements and design workshops, especially across the teams when they have dependencies. There are other means when they involve people to planning, to sprint planning in case of dependencies, etc., etc. We use tools like program boards to track dependencies, and basically sometimes we see the situation when team A writes acceptance tests for team B because they have a dependency, and team A is just a downstream team regarding team B. That all happens. Scrum is just one of those cases, and that's program level.
Okay, thank you.
Well, we're at the end of the time box. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Drew and Alex, thank you so much.
Thanks,
Thank you, guys. We're going to hang out here for a bit. We've got a big picture, and you've got little pictures, so feel free if you want to come up and chat a little bit. Thanks so much.